In the gilded halls of Kensington Palace, where every whisper could spark a scandal and every glance was measured by 100 watching eyes, Queen Anne of England held a secret that could shatter her throne. For 20 years, she had loved a woman, her closest confidant, her dearest friend, her everything. Sarah Churchill, the Duchess of Marlborough, was not just her advisor, she was the fire that kept Anne's fragile heart beating. But in 1707, as war raged across Europe and political enemies circled like vultures, their bond faced its most devastating test. One forbidden love. Two powerful women. A kingdom that would never understand. Before we dive into this extraordinary true story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me, have you ever had to hide who you truly love? Let's get into this royal affair that changed history forever. The morning of March 15th, 1707, began like every other morning in Queen Anne's reign, with pain. Anne sat at the edge of her ornate bed, her swollen legs throbbing beneath layers of silk and lace. At 42 years old, she looked 20 years older. Gout ravaged her joints. 17 pregnancies had destroyed her body, leaving her with no surviving children and a grief that never quite healed. She was Queen of England, Scotland, and Ireland, the most powerful woman in the world, and she felt utterly powerless. "Your Majesty, you must try to stand." The voice belonged to Abigail Hill, her new lady-in-waiting, whose gentle hands helped Anne to her feet. But Anne barely heard her. Her mind was elsewhere, drifting to the apartments across the palace where she lived. Sarah. Even thinking her name sent a flutter through Anne's chest, a feeling she tried to suppress for decades but never could. "Has the Duchess sent word?" Anne asked, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. Abigail's expression shifted, something Anne had learned to recognize. Pity mixed with calculation. "No, Your Majesty. The Duchess of Marlborough remains at St. Albans with her husband." With her husband. Those 3 words were like knives. Anne hobbled to the window overlooking the gardens, memories flooding back unbidden. She was 10 years old again, meeting Sarah Jennings for the first time, a dazzling 15-year-old beauty with fire-red hair and eyes that saw straight through all the royal pretense. Sarah had been assigned as a maid of honor to Anne's stepmother, but from their first conversation, Anne knew she'd found something precious. Someone who talked to her like a person, not a princess. "You don't have to curtsy every 5 seconds," Sarah had laughed, linking arms with young Anne as they walked through the palace corridors. "We're going to be friends, you and I, real friends." And they had been. More than friends. Anne remembered the first time she truly understood what she felt. She was 16 and Sarah was dancing at a ball. Anne couldn't breathe watching her move, watching other men watch her. The jealousy that ripped through her chest was unlike anything she'd experienced. That night she'd written the first of thousands of letters she would pen to Sarah over the years. "Mrs. Freeman," the letters always began. Their secret names for each other. Sarah was Mrs. Freeman because she spoke freely, without restraint. Anne was Mrs. Morley, a common woman, stripped of her title, just a person in love. "Mrs. Freeman, I cannot sleep for thinking of you. Your absence is a death to me. Come back soon, for Mrs. Morley withers without her son." The letters had grown more passionate over the years, more desperate. Anne had married Prince George of Denmark because she had to, duty demanded it, but her heart had never left Sarah's chambers. And when Sarah married John Churchill and became the Duchess of Marlborough, Anne had felt her world crack in half. Yet somehow, impossibly, their bond had only grown stronger. Sarah became Anne's first lady of the bedchamber when Anne became queen 5 years ago. They spent every possible moment together, talking, laughing, arguing. Sarah was the only person who could make Anne feel alive, the only one who challenged her, pushed her, saw her. "Your Majesty, the cabinet is waiting." Anne turned from the window, her jaw tight. "Tell them the Queen will arrive when she's ready." Abigail curtsied and left, but not before Anne caught that look again. Abigail knew
Maybe not everything, but enough. The palace always knew in its own way. There had been whispers for years, the unnatural attachment they called it, her blind devotion to the Duchess. Let them whisper. Anne was queen, and no one could touch her. Except Sarah could. Sarah always could. The truth was, everything was falling apart. The War of Spanish Succession raged on, draining England's coffers while Sarah's husband, the Duke of Marlborough, led the armies abroad. Parliament was a snake pit of competing factions. The Whigs wanted one thing, the Tories another, and Anne was caught in the middle, expected to navigate political waters she barely understood. She relied on Sarah for everything, advice, strategy, comfort. But lately something had shifted. Sarah's letters were shorter, colder. Her visits had become rare, and when she did come to court, she spent more time arguing with Anne than embracing her. 3 weeks ago, they'd had their worst fight yet. "You're impossible," Sarah had shouted, pacing Anne's private chambers like a caged lioness. "You listen to everyone except me. That simpering Abigail has more influence over you now than I do." "That's not true." Anne had risen from her chair, ignoring the pain shooting through her legs. "You're never here, Sarah. You're always at St. Albans or with your husband or—" "My husband is fighting a war for your crown, while you sit here playing favorites with servants." The words had cut deeper than any blade. Anne had reached for Sarah's hand, desperate to bridge the chasm opening between them. "Please, my dearest, don't!" But Sarah had pulled away. "I'm not your dearest anymore, Anne. I don't know what I am to you these days." She'd left without another word, and Anne hadn't seen her since. Now, standing in her chambers 3 weeks later, Anne made a decision. She would go to Sarah. She would cross the palace, climb into her carriage despite the agony it would cause, and ride to St. Albans. She would lay herself bare, confess everything she'd kept hidden behind the safety of Mrs. Morley and Mrs. Freeman. She would tell Sarah the truth. "I have loved you for 30 years. You are the only thing that makes this gilded cage bearable. Without you, I am nothing." Anne rang for her attendants, her heart hammering with a mixture of fear and hope. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that at that very moment, Sarah was composing a letter that would destroy everything. But before we get to that devastating moment, let me know in the comments, would you risk everything for a love that society says is wrong?
The journey to St. Albans took 3 hours, and every bump in the road sent fresh waves of pain through Anne's ravaged body, but she didn't care. She clutched Sarah's last letter, written 6 months ago, pressing it against her chest like a talisman. "My dear Mrs. Morley, you must not doubt my affection, though circumstances keep us apart. You are always in my thoughts, as constant as the North Star. Your devoted Mrs. Freeman." Anne had read it so many times the paper was worn soft. She needed to hear those words again, spoken aloud, with Sarah's eyes meeting hers. She needed to know she hadn't imagined 30 years of connection, of stolen glances and hands held just a moment too long, of letters that burned with barely concealed passion. When the carriage finally rolled through the gates of Marlborough House, Anne's stomach twisted with anticipation. She'd sent no advance warning. She wanted to surprise Sarah, to catch her off guard, to break through whatever wall had risen between them. A butler appeared, his face a mask of professional courtesy. "Your Majesty, we weren't expecting." "Where is the Duchess?" Anne cut him off, leaning heavily on her cane as she climbed down from the carriage. "In the drawing-room, Your Majesty, but perhaps I should announce." "No need." Anne pushed past him, her determination overriding her pain. She found Sarah exactly where the butler had indicated, seated at a writing desk by the window. Sunlight caught her hair, still that stunning auburn, though streaked with silver now, and for a moment Anne forgot how to breathe. Even after all these years, Sarah could still make her heart stop. "Sarah!" The Duchess turned, and Anne saw the flash of emotions cross her face. Surprise, pleasure, and then something else. Something that looked almost like guilt. "Anne!" This is unexpected. I needed to see you. We need to talk." "About what?" Sarah's voice was guarded, her body language closed off in a way Anne had never seen before. "About us. About why you've been avoiding me. About—" Anne took a painful step forward, reaching out. "Sarah, please, tell me what's wrong. Whatever I've done, whatever's happened, we can fix it. We always do." For a moment, just a heartbeat, Sarah's mask cracked. Anne saw the woman she loved, vulnerable and conflicted. But then the walls slammed back up. "There is no us, Anne." Sarah's voice was precise, surgical. "You've become too dependent on me. It's unhealthy, inappropriate. People talk, Anne. They've always talked, but now—" She gestured helplessly. "Your attachment to me damages your reputation. It damages my reputation." "Attachment?" Anne felt something breaking inside her chest. "Is that what you call 30 years of friendship? Of—" She couldn't say the word love when Sarah was looking at her like a stranger. "Sarah, you're everything to me. You know that. I've shown you in every letter. Those letters need to stop." Sarah turned away, her shoulders rigid. "Abigail showed me the last one you sent. The one where you called yourself my most faithful slave, who would die 1,000 deaths for me. Anne, it's too much. It's always been too much." The betrayal hit like a physical blow. "You showed Abigail my private letters? She's concerned about you, as am I." Sarah finally turned back, but her expression was cold, clinical. "You've made me into some sort of obsession. It's not natural, Anne. It's not right." Not natural. Not right. The words Anne had feared hearing her entire life, spoken by the one person she'd trusted never to speak them. "I love you." The confession tore from Anne's throat, raw and desperate. "I've loved you since I was 16 years old. I've loved you through your marriage, through mine, through every moment of every day. That's why I made you my closest advisor when I became queen. That's why I gave you apartments next to mine. That's why—" Her voice broke. "Sarah, you're my heart. You're my reason for enduring all of this." The silence that followed was devastating. Sarah stood perfectly still, her face carefully blank. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but merciless. "I know." 2 words. That was all. "I know." You know?" Anne felt the ground disappearing beneath her feet. "I've always known, Anne. Did you think I couldn't see it? Every longing glance, every desperate letter, every time you arranged things so we'd be alone together?" She shook her head. "I've known for 30 years. "Then why?" Anne couldn't finish the question. "Why did you let me hope? Why did you stay? Why did you sign your letters, your devoted Mrs. Freeman, if you didn't feel the same?" Sarah seemed to read her mind. "Because you were useful to me." The brutal honesty was like a knife. "First, you were a princess who could advance my position at court. Then you became queen, and you could give my husband military commands, grant us lands and titles, shower us with wealth and power." She met Anne's eyes without flinching. "I've been a good friend to you, Anne. I've advised you well, served you loyally. But that's all it was. Service. Strategy." "No." Anne shook her head, refusing to believe it. "No, you cared. I felt it. The way you looked at me, the things you said." "I said what you needed to hear." Her voice was matter-of-fact. "You were lonely, desperate for affection. It was easy to give you enough to keep you devoted while maintaining enough distance to avoid scandal." She paused. "But now things have changed. John is the greatest general in Europe. We have more wealth and influence than we need, and your continued attachment has become a liability rather than an asset."
Anne felt tears streaming down her face, but she was beyond caring about dignity. "You used me! For 30 years, you used me!" "I gave you what you wanted, a companion, someone to confide in, someone to make you feel less alone. It wasn't all calculation, Anne. I do care for you in my way, but not the way you want, not the way you need." "Then why the letters?" Anne pulled Sarah's last letter from her pocket, now crumpled and tear-strained. "Why sign them, your devoted Mrs. Freeman? Why create those names if it meant nothing?" "Because it made you happy. And a happy queen was a generous queen." The pragmatism of it, the cold, calculated nature of what Anne had thought was love, shattered something fundamental inside her. "Get out." The words came out as a whisper. "Anne, get out!" Anne's voice rose to a scream, months of pain and frustration and heartbreak exploding. "Get out of my sight! You're dismissed from all your positions, you're banned from court, I never want to see you again." Sarah's composure finally cracked. "You can't do this! John is fighting your war! The Whigs will—" "I don't care." Anne was sobbing now, her body shaking with the force of her anguish. "I don't care about the war or the Whigs or anything else. You destroyed me, Sarah. You took my heart and you... She couldn't finish. The pain was too enormous, too consuming. She collapsed into a chair, her body folding in on itself as 30 years of hidden love and secret hope came crashing down. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, and Anne thought she saw something like regret in her eyes. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. "I'll leave," Sarah said quietly. "But Anne, this isn't over. The political consequences. Go." Anne didn't look up. "Just go." And Sarah did. The door closed with a soft click, and Anne was alone. Alone in a way she'd never been before. The woman who had been her sun, her stars, her entire universe, had just walked away, revealing that everything, every moment, every tender word, every signed letter, had been a manipulation. Anne sat in that drawing room for hours as twilight fell around her. Her attendants eventually found her, helped her back to the carriage, supported her through the journey home. But Anne barely registered any of it. She'd given her heart to someone who had only ever seen her as a means to an end. She'd spent 30 years loving a ghost, a fantasy of her own creation. And now she had to figure out how to survive as Queen of England with her heart ripped to pieces. What Anne didn't know was that Sarah's confession wasn't entirely true. But by the time the truth came out, it would be far too late. The next 6 months transformed Anne in ways no one could have predicted. The heartbroken, lovesick queen who'd arrived back from St. Albans seemed to die that night. In her place emerged someone harder, colder, more ruthless. Someone who'd learned that love was a weakness and sentiment was a luxury she could no longer afford. Anne threw herself into ruling with a vengeance. She met with her ministers daily, made decisions without seeking anyone's advice, and, most tellingly, elevated Abigail Hill to fill every position Sarah had once held. The court was scandalized. The Whigs, who'd relied on Sarah's influence, found themselves suddenly without access to the Queen. The Marlborough's power began to crumble. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should reconsider," Lord Godolphin, the Lord Treasurer, tried to argue one afternoon in September. "The Duchess of Marlborough is a traitor to my affection," Anne cut him off, her voice like ice. "I will not hear her name spoken in my presence again." What Anne didn't tell anyone, what she couldn't tell anyone, was that the pain hadn't lessened. If anything, it had grown worse. Every night, alone in her chambers, she pulled out Sarah's letters and read them by candlelight, torturing herself with memories of what she'd thought they'd had. "You are always in my thoughts, as constant as the North Star. Lies, all of it, lies." Abigail had become Anne's shadow. Always present, always attentive, She was everything Sarah wasn't: soft-spoken, deferential, uncomplicated. She never challenged Anne, never argued, never made demands. "You're so much easier to be around," Anne told her one evening as Abigail helped her prepare for bed. "You don't expect anything from me." "I only want your happiness, Your Majesty." Abigail's hands were gentle as she brushed Anne's hair. "You've been hurt so badly. You deserve peace." And Anne found a strange kind of peace in Abigail's presence. Not love, she'd learned her lesson about love, but companionship without complications, friendship without devastation. What Anne didn't realize was that Abigail was playing the same game Sarah had perfected, winning the Queen's favor for political gain. Abigail was secretly married to Samuel Masham, a Tory supporter, and every private conversation she had with Anne was carefully calculated to shift the Queen's politics rightward. But Anne was too wounded to see it. Or perhaps she didn't care. Perhaps after Sarah's betrayal, she had decided that everyone used everyone, and at least Abigail didn't pretend otherwise. Then, in October, a letter arrived that changed everything. It came from Sarah's cousin, Elizabeth, and it was marked private, most urgent. Anne almost threw it in the fire unread. She had given strict orders that nothing from the Marlborough family should reach her, but something, curiosity, or perhaps the ghost of old feelings, made her break the seal. "Your Majesty, I write to you at great risk, but my conscience will not allow silence. You must know the truth about what happened at St. Albans. Sarah did not speak from her heart that day. She spoke from fear. 3 days before your visit, she received a letter from Lord Harley and his Tory supporters. They had obtained several of your letters to Sarah, the most passionate ones, where you declared your love explicitly. They threatened to publish them, to destroy both your reputations and remove John from his military command unless Sarah ended your friendship publicly and completely. Sarah tried to refuse. I was there when she read their demands. She wept, Your Majesty. She said she'd rather be ruined than hurt you. But they threatened more than just scandal. They threatened John's life, promised to have him arrested for treason on fabricated charges if Sarah didn't comply.
So she did what she thought would protect you both. She lied. She made you hate her so you'd push her away, creating the distance the Tories demanded while preserving your reputation. She thought if you believed she'd never loved you, you'd move on, find happiness elsewhere. But I've seen her since that day, Your Majesty. She's destroyed. She drinks too much, barely eats, spends hours staring at your old letters. She's written you a dozen times, but burned every letter, convinced she's doing the right thing by staying away. I don't know if this information will matter to you. Perhaps the damage is too deep, but I couldn't let you believe Sarah used you for 30 years. The truth is far simpler and far more tragic. She loved you. She's always loved you. She just loved you enough to break both your hearts to keep you safe. Your humble servant, Elizabeth Seymour. Anne read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking worse with each pass. She loved you. She's always loved you. The words rewrote everything. Every cold statement Sarah had made, every cruel revelation, all of it had been a lie, a sacrifice, a desperate attempt to protect Anne from scandal that would have destroyed her reign. Anne felt the careful walls she'd built around her heart begin to crack. The anger that had sustained her for 6 months suddenly seemed misplaced, foolish. Sarah hadn't betrayed her. Sarah had saved her. But at what cost? Anne stood, ignoring the pain in her legs, and rang for her secretary. "Prepare a carriage. I'm going to St. Albans." "Your Majesty, it's nearly midnight." "Now." The journey felt endless. Anne clutched Elizabeth's letter, her mind racing through possibilities. What would she say? Would Sarah forgive her for believing the lies? Could they somehow repair what had been shattered? When she arrived at Marlborough House,
Every window was dark except one, Sarah's bedchamber. Anne dismissed her attendants and made her way inside alone, climbing the stairs with painful determination. She knocked softly. No answer. She tried the door, unlocked, and pushed it open. Sarah was at her desk, surrounded by papers and empty wine bottles. She looked up, and Anne's heart broke at the sight. Sarah's face was gaunt, her eyes red-rimmed, her famous beauty dimmed by grief.
Anne? Sarah's voice was hoarse with disbelief. What are you... Elizabeth told me. Anne moved closer, tears already falling. She told me everything. The letters they stole, the threats they made, what you did to protect me. Sarah's face crumbled. She promised she wouldn't. I made her promise. Why? Anne reached her, gripping the edge of the desk to stay upright. Why would you let me believe you'd used me? Why would you let me hate you? Because it was the only way to keep you safe. Sarah stood abruptly, knocking over her chair. They would have published those letters, Anne. Every passionate word you wrote would have been in every newspaper, every pamphlet. They would have painted you as unnatural, perverted. Your reign would have ended in disgrace. I wouldn't have cared. Anne grabbed Sarah's arm. Don't you understand? I would have given up the crown, the kingdom, everything for you. And that's exactly why I couldn't let it happen. Sarah pulled away, pacing like a caged animal. You're Queen of England. You have responsibilities, duties. You can't throw it all away for... She stopped, unable to finish. For love? Anne supplied quietly. For the person who's been my entire world for 30 years? Sarah turned, and finally, the truth was written plainly on her face. No more masks, no more pretense, just raw, devastating honesty. I've loved you since you were 10 years old. From the moment you first smiled at me, I was lost. Every year that passed, I loved you more. But I'm not a queen, Anne. I'm just a woman who had to watch the person she loved most marry someone else, bear children, suffer, all while I stood by, pretending friendship was enough. Then why? Anne moved closer again, hope and agony warring in her chest. Why did you marry John? Why did you... Because I had to. Sarah's voice broke. Because women like us don't get to choose love, Anne. We get to choose survival. John was kind, ambitious. He gave me security, children, a place in society. And yes, I grew to care for him. But he's never been you. No one's ever been you. They stood inches apart now, 30 years of yearning in the space between them. The things I said to you that day, Sarah continued, tears streaming down her face, about using you, about it being strategy, lies, all lies. But I thought if I made you hate me, if I destroyed whatever you felt, maybe you'd be safe. Maybe you'd move on with Abigail or someone else who could love you publicly without destroying your life. Anne reached up, cupping Sarah's face with trembling hands. You foolish, magnificent woman. Did you really think I could ever move on from you? I hoped. Sarah closed her eyes, leaning into Anne's touch. I hoped you'd find happiness somewhere, with someone who wouldn't be a constant threat to everything you are. You are my happiness. Everything else is just duty. They stared at each other, the truth finally spoken, the walls finally down, and then after 30 years of restraint, of propriety, of hiding, Anne leaned forward and kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, as if they both feared it might shatter. But then Sarah's arms came around Anne, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home after a lifetime lost at sea. When they finally broke apart, both were crying. What do we do now? Sarah asked against Anne's lips. The threats are still real. The letters are still out there. Nothing has changed. Anne pulled back just enough to meet Sarah's eyes. Everything has changed. We know the truth now. And I'm not running anymore. I'm not hiding anymore.
Her voice grew stronger. "I'm Queen of England. Let them come with their threats. Let them publish every letter. I'll face it with you by my side. Anne, you can't. Watch me." But declaring war on political enemies is easier to say than done, and the price of their love was about to become terrifyingly clear.
The next 3 years were the happiest and hardest of Anne's life. She reinstated Sarah to all her former positions, making it clear to the entire court that the Duchess of Marlborough was back in favor. The political establishment reacted with fury. The Tories, who'd orchestrated Sarah's removal, began a campaign of whispered rumors and printed pamphlets. The most vicious ones, called the Queen unnatural, suggested her affections were ungodly, implied that Sarah had bewitched her with sapphic arts. The words hurt, but Anne bore them with dignity she'd never possessed before. "Let them say what they want," she told Sarah one afternoon, as they walked together in the palace gardens, openly, defiantly, no longer hiding. "I spent 30 years afraid of words. I'm done being afraid." But the words had consequences. Several members of Parliament openly discussed limiting the Queen's powers. There was talk of forcing Anne to abdicate in favor of her distant Protestant relatives. The nation was already divided by war. Now it threatened to tear itself apart over the Queen's private life. Through it all, Sarah stood beside Anne, not as a strategist or a courtier, but as a partner. They still maintained separate bedchambers. Some proprieties had to be observed, but everyone knew the Queen and the Duchess were inseparable. John Churchill, surprisingly, became one of their quiet supporters. When Anne worried that her relationship with Sarah was hurting his military career, John had simply smiled and said, "Your Majesty, Sarah has been in love with you since before I married her. I've always known I had her hand, but you had her heart. I'm not fool enough to compete with that." His acceptance, his understanding, gave them all a strange kind of peace. But peace never lasts long in politics. In 1710, the Tories finally made their move. They didn't need the stolen letters anymore. The public relationship between Anne and Sarah was scandal enough. Led by Robert Harley, they introduced a motion in Parliament to formally limit the Queen's powers, citing her compromised judgment and unnatural influences. Anne was given a choice: dismiss Sarah permanently and publicly condemn their relationship, or face a constitutional crisis that could end her reign. Sarah begged her to choose the crown. "This is bigger than us, Anne. England needs you. I'll go quietly. No." Anne's voice was steel. She'd grown stronger over these years, more confident. Love had done that for her, given her courage she'd never known she possessed. "I will not betray you again. Not for Parliament, not for the kingdom, not for anything." She called an emergency session of Parliament and did something unprecedented. She told the truth. Standing before the assembled Lords and Commons, her body racked with pain, but her voice clear and strong, Anne spoke. "You demand I explain my affection for the Duchess of Marlborough. Very well. I have loved her for 35 years. Not as a subject loves a queen, or as a friend loves a friend, but as one soul loves another. I make no apologies for this. I offer no excuses. You call it unnatural? I call it the most natural thing I've ever known. You say it compromises my judgment. I say it has been my judgment's foundation. Sarah Churchill has advised me, guided me, and stood beside me through every crisis of my reign. You threaten to remove me from the throne for loving a woman. Then do so. Take the crown. I will not trade my humanity for your approval." The hall erupted in chaos. Half the lords shouted their support, half demanded her immediate removal. The session devolved into something close to physical violence. But something happened that night that no one expected. The people sided with their queen. Anne's speech was published in newspapers across London. Within days, public opinion began to shift.
People who'd never given much thought to the Queen's private life suddenly saw her as human, someone capable of love and courage and sacrifice. Better a queen who loves truly than one who loves nothing. We've had enough of cold monarchs on cold thrones. The Tories, sensing their miscalculation, backed down. The motion to limit Anne's powers failed, and while whispers and scandals continued, the immediate threat passed. Anne had won, not by hiding or compromising, but by refusing to apologize for her heart. But victory came with a price. The stress of those years, combined with Anne's declining health, took its toll. By 1713, it was clear she didn't have much time left. Her body was failing, her pain nearly constant. Sarah rarely left her side. They spent their remaining time together in Anne's private chambers, finally able to simply exist without the weight of politics or scandal. "Do you regret it?" Anne asked her one evening, as Sarah read to her by candlelight. "Everything we went through, the pain, the scandal, the fights." Sarah set down her book and took Anne's hand. "Not a moment of it. Even the worst days with you were better than the best days without you." "I wish we'd had more time," Anne whispered. "I wish we could have lived differently, loved differently. We loved the only way we could. And that's enough. That has to be enough." Anne died on August 1st, 1714, with Sarah holding her hand. Her final words were simple. "Thank you for being brave enough to love me."
In the years after Anne's death, historians tried to sanitize their relationship, reduce it to romantic friendship or intense devotion. The letters were hidden away, some destroyed, their passion erased from official records. But the truth survived in the words Anne and Sarah had left behind, in letters that spoke of souls entwined, of love that defied every rule of their era. In the choices Anne made to face scandal rather than lose Sarah, to risk her throne rather than deny her heart. Their love story wasn't neat or simple. It was complicated by politics, by marriage, by misunderstandings and manipulations. They hurt each other terribly and forgave each other completely. They were flawed, human, desperate to love in a world that said their love was impossible. But they did it anyway. Queen Anne and Sarah Churchill proved that love doesn't wait for the world to be ready. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't apologize. It simply exists, fierce and true and undeniable, even in the face of everything trying to destroy it. Especially then. So, what do you think? Drop a comment telling me, would you have made the same choice Anne did? Would you risk everything for love? And don't forget to subscribe for more historical love stories that changed the world. This is one queen who refused to let her crown define her heart. And maybe that's the most royal thing she ever did.